very warm welcome to our annual flagship event on the European Day of Foundations and Donors. It's great to have you here. Today we are showcasing all over Europe the beneficial role that foundations and donors play in all our European societies, and that's also why a colleague will share in the chat now the hashtag that we are using, and please don't hesitate to refer to it in your social media activities, October 1 Europe. Under non-COVID conditions, we would meet today in the European Parliament in Brussels and celebrate the value of philanthropy, private resources for public good, with EU policymakers from all political groups. But this year is different. And it is a pleasure to host all of you, philanthropy experts, politicians, academics, foundation representatives, lawyers, and friends in this online format. My name is Max von Abendroth. I'm working for the Donors and Foundations Networks in Europe, and I have the pleasure to welcome you also on behalf of the co-facilitator, Hanna Somatz from the European Foundation Center, waving to all of you. This event is organized by Philanthropy Advocacy, a joint initiative of the EFC and Daphne, and we are working on maintaining and improving the operating environment for foundations across Europe. This is why today is such a crucial moment for all of us. Today we are launching the latest edition of the Comparative Highlights, a unique publication comparing foundation law across 40 countries. But before we start with our program and unveil and discuss some of the outstanding insights from this brand new publication, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping rules. So the first one is that this event will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to those colleagues and friends who cannot be here with us today. We invite you to add your name and organization in the little window at the bottom of your video. So that would be great. So then you're more easily to identify also in the chat later on when you leave messages there. And finally, please use the chat to ask your question during the next 1.5 hours. We will then, as moderators, collect the questions, put them together and address them to the speakers as we go, and of course also as time allows. Now let me just very briefly give you an overview of the program. We start with a welcome of the chairs of Daphne and EFC. Then Professor Helmut Anheier from the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin will lead us into the topic of today. Ludwig Forrest from the King Baudouin Foundation is with us today to present us then the new publication of the Comparative Highlights. And then Hanna Somatz will guide us through a series of snapshot interviews with academics and policymakers on the most burning policy issues we are dealing with right now. And at the end, Delphine Morales, my colleague from the European Foundation Center, will finally close this meeting and provide an outlook at around 11:30. With any further ado, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Carola Carazzone, the chair of Daphne and Secretary General of the Italian Association of Foundations Acifero, followed by Angel Font, the chair of the European Foundation Center and corporate director of scientific research at La Caixa Foundation in Spain. Carola and Angel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Max. Today, the 1st of October, since 2013, we celebrate the European Day of Foundations and Donors. And it's the day where we want to highlight the invaluable, diverse work of public benefit foundation across our continent. Daphne and the EFC together are launching today a campaign called Stepping into Tomorrow. And we want to raise awareness about philanthropy's contribution to build a better future for the next generations as a strategic partner at local, national, regional, and global level. Philanthropy and foundation, for me, there is no better way to celebrate the Day of the European Day of Foundation and Donor than launching this new publication that is really the most comprehensive ever overview about the enabling environment for philanthropy across Europe. I am really honored that we are launching this 5th edition of the Comparative Highlights of Foundation Law. The first edition was in 2007, and it's really amazing to see how the European philanthropy sector has been growing and evolve, becoming really more outward looking and international across these years. The legal and regulatory environment in which philanthropy operates daily have changed across the last decade very much, with an increased influence of European and international law on philanthropy law. The comparative highlights serve as a unique, invaluable benchmark for highlighting patterns and identifying rules that fall outside the common denominators in both positive and negative ways. And these insights enable legislators, philanthropists, the practitioner, academics to compare what is happening in the different countries and in our own domestic situation, and really can help in identifying national effort and European effort to advocate for a more favorable operating environment, not only for foundations and philanthropy, but of course for civil society in general. In the Finnish and Swedish foundation sector, for example, this comparison helped advocate to argue that tax incentives for giving are the norm in other European countries, and therefore should be introduced in countries in Finland and Sweden as well. Bulgarian foundation have used, for example, the comparative highlights to help preserve a tax incentive for philanthropic giving in their own country. And so I'm really honored to have this opportunity today to discuss between academic, expert, and policymaker about the findings of this study. And I just want to thank you, especially Hanna Schumarz and Nicoletta Bitterova, for the invaluable work of coordinating this. Angel, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Carola. And I would like also to, as you made, to welcome all of you to this event. We are very happy also to celebrate again this 1st of October, this day of the European Foundations. As Carola mentioned, for us it's important because philanthropy has grown and evolved tremendously in the last years. And for that reason, to have new data and new knowledge about the regulation, the law, this comparison is important. This is the 3rd edition, as Carola said, of these comparative highlights. It's a broad analysis on legal, fiscal environments for philanthropy across a lot of countries, close to 40 countries. It's our wider Europe that we represent. It's a great piece of job of work, and I would like that has been guided by our advisory committee of experts. I would like to thank all them for the contributions, also for the contributions of all the members, foundations, platforms, researchers, experts that has contributed to this work. And especially I would like to thank to Stiftung Mercator for supporting also the publication. But a special thanks for all the philanthropy advocacy team that has been working the last 2 years in these difficult situations. And maybe I would like to highlight Nicoletta Bitterova as a coordinating person of this work. I hope that all of you find this publication and this event useful, at least as useful as we have found when we had the opportunity to read it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angel and Carola, for these welcoming words. And I have now the great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Helmut Anheier. He is Professor of Sociology at the Hertie School in Berlin. He is also a member of the faculty at the University of California and visiting professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Professor Anheier has been researching in the field of philanthropy and its operating environment for many, many years and is a great connoisseur of the matter that is on the table today. Thank you for your very inspiring introduction to the Comparative Highlights publication, Professor Anheier. My question to you is, what are your key thoughts around foundations and their operating environment?
Well, thank you so much. And also I was very, very honored to be asked to contribute the foreword to this very important and timely publication. I think one is tempted to give a 2-hour lecture on that question you just asked me, but allow me to be brief. I think what strikes you first of all when looking at philanthropy in Europe is the great diversity of organizational forms, but also of regulatory frameworks. And that is so different when you compare it to the United States, where we have a certain homogeneity in organizational forms. Of course, there is a reason for that. And while we tend to celebrate the diversity of philanthropy in Europe, I would also say that it is a problem. And it is a problem precisely for the reasons I want to outline in the few minutes I have. Because the diversity that we have today is the product of a 100-year-old, give or take a few decades, process of various legal political compromises about how do we fit this role of philanthropy into the modern liberal market economy. And when you look at the history of foundation law, most of the basics were laid around the time when we introduced the civil law in most EU countries. But you see, at that time, the state was a very different state from what it is today. And there was a certain suspicion when it came to the endowed independent foundation, which many have argued is one of the most independent organizations that we have in modern society. So from the very beginning, there was a certain tension between philanthropy, so private contributions to the public good, and the role of the state to be both the enabler of it, because the state welcomed these contributions under certain circumstances, but also constrict them vis-a-vis, you might say, politics, but also vis-a-vis the economy. So the border control problem was very much there. And you only have to look at the different regulatory environments in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, in Italy, or in Sweden. Right? Very, very different stances, and also the spirit of the regulation is quite distinct. And now these are coming increasingly into contact, and that's the purpose of the book today, right? So how do we deal then with cross-border philanthropy? I would say, and I end with that in virtually all member states of the Union, we have had few and late reforms, but they did not go far enough when it came to modernizing philanthropy. So it is true, we had an expansion in philanthropy, but it has slowed down. It has slowed down over the last 15 years. And the big expansion was, let's say, from the late 80s into the early 2000s. And that is different in the United States, right? So at some point, the diversity also can hold you back, right? And the innovations in philanthropy are more in the US than they are in Europe. And we have to think about why that is the case. So I think we need to look at domestic reforms in a very serious way. And unless we get new energy and new buy-in around the European Foundation Statute, we are condemned to be in a perpetual modeling through mode when it comes to cross-border philanthropy. And I think that's why this publication is so important, because it helps us in making a very good and convincing argument at the Commission and in the Parliament that we need to get active on modernizing foundation regulations at the European Union level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Anheier. What an excellent door opener to now dive a little bit deeper into the analysis of the different legal systems we have across Europe. And in order to take us in this next step, I'm handing over to Hanna Somatz, who will guide us through the second part of this session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Helmut, also for your inspiring opening remarks. And indeed, we have seen some foundation laws reformed, but we've also seen that they sometimes do not always respond to the needs of the sector, and I think we'll come back to that later. So now we want to formally really launch the publication, and who can better do that as Ludwig Forrest, who has been co-chair of the Philanthropy Advocacy Legal Affairs Committee for some time. He works for the King Baudouin Foundation. He's philanthropy advisor. He also guides and gives advice to cross-border philanthropic initiatives. And he's been around experiencing both in practice and part of discussions about foundation philanthropy reforms, really someone promoting also an enabling space for philanthropy. So Ludwig, maybe you could just, as the co-chair of LAC and as the philanthropy advisor around cross-border international philanthropy setups, share a little bit of why you think the publication is useful, and then of course, share with us maybe some of the trends that you have observed after you have kicked off the launch. That is your task today. Over to you, Ludwig.
Thank you, Hannah. So good morning to all of you. So indeed, I have been asked to do a very difficult task. In normal circumstances, we would all be in the room. There, in the European Parliament, I heard, there would be a white sheet covering this incredible publication, and I would have to tear down the sheet or maybe just take it away to unleash the publication. The publication would then have been revealed to the world. What an honor for me. But now, apparently, we will be able to do it virtually. I have no clue how, but again, teams we can count on find a virtual trick to do that. But first, before doing that, some figures. This publication, Hannah said it, 20 years of work and 20 years of evolution. 3 comparative highlights, 5 country profile publications. This publication covers 40 countries. Angel said it, 40 countries, 40, 40, to say it in French. On 33 aspects of legal and fiscal environments for foundations and for philanthropy. It has been done by 2 organizations, two great organizations. We benefit in the publication from 8 contributions of international experts to put the results in perspective. And everything is based on the work of 50 national experts. Why 50 experts for 40 countries? Because in some countries, the environment is so difficult that we needed more than 1 expert to get through the work. 7 members of the advisory committee, thank you to them, because they helped a lot. 120 interesting pages. Not one single page is less interesting than the other one. And finally, last but not least, as we rightly always say, 4 staff members, 4 staff contributors that did this work. So if I would be in the room before all of you sitting there, I would not take away the white sheet. I would have asked to Nicoletta to do it because she deserves it much more than I do. But now that we are virtual, Nicoletta, please, can you virtually unleash this publication?
Thank you, Ludwig, for your kind words, and I have a pleasure to do so.
So here you see the great cover, and you will, obviously, if you can scroll a little bit down to the content, you will see everything that what has been told. So again, congratulations for it, but now let's make the best use of it. So the forward, introduction, comparative summary, the perspective from people and colleagues you will hear a little bit later, a point-by-point analysis, the comparative charts, the greatly appreciated comparative charts. So Anna, your question was, and the names of the national expert. Anna, your question was, how will we use it? and what are some trends that we found out of it? How will we use it? As I said, for the country profiles, because these are comparative highlights, and the country profiles to complete this more than ever. So it's a double tool. But comparative highlights. Do you know one place where you can find all the tax reductions and deductions for Europe, and even more than Europe? People are, before, without such a publication, people would have to work for hours to find the right information. Do you know one place where you know all the legal constraints to build up a foundation in 40 countries? Here you have a first view. So how will I use it? When I am facing a donor wanting to create a foundation, I will refer to it. When I am facing a beneficiary wanting to fundraise in Europe, I will refer to it. When I face one person that wants to do a legacy from one country to another, I will refer to it. Is this complete? Maybe not, but it gives a first information, sorry. It will give a first information to people that want to act in this place, in making a legacy. And this will be completed by experts. This will be completed by philanthropy advisors, but it helps. It will trigger and it will foster philanthropy all across Europe. What are the trends? And I will finish by that. Some trends, at least. We see that the toolbox of foundation has been enlarged. More and more foundations can act with economic activities, support social businesses. These activities are now better regulated, or at least incorporated in national laws. So that's a very good evolution. The role and the use of foundations capital has also known a big evolutions. New forms of generating income have been introduced in national laws. There are increased due diligence requirements, and more influence from international and European law. Control mechanism, you all know it, fighting money laundering and terrorism financing has increased these last years. And this is quite normal, but sometimes over-regulated. Go to the publication and you will see that. Even though the European Court of Justice has done incredible work, some barriers remain: transfer of seat, cross-border giving, cross-border legating. Barriers remain, but are still improving, and also the initiative we'll hear from European Parliament and the European Commission are going into that right direction. One last trend, we see that governments are also trying to encourage, some government and many governments are trying to encourage philanthropy by providing new positive incentives to philanthropy, and that's the good news. And I would like to finish on that, and very happy to hear what other experts, but also European Parliament and European Commission will add on this. Thank you so much again for the honor.
Thank you, Ludwig, so much. So now the publication is launched, and hallelujah, that was a long period of work. And as you say, we have been basing the comparative views, which are also snapshot views, based on the country profiles drafted by national experts, 40 of them. And if you want to find out in more depth, you're also encouraged to contact directly the national experts for more information on a specific country. And the problem or the challenge is always, of course, comparative views and analysis. They are always incomplete. They have to be, because comparisons are very difficult. We have different traditions, different concepts, different legal terms, and it's of course the attention has to be made to not to compare apples and oranges, but that's in the end what you do when you compare. So that is the challenge that, of course, all comparisons have to deal with. And who knows that better than Una Breen? So I have the pleasure now to move to short snapshot interviews with some academics, policymakers. The academics are part also of the advisory committee who have been guiding the work of the entire mapping project. and have been commenting and giving their input. So the pleasure is now to give the floor to Una Green, Professor of Law in Ireland University College of Dublin. She has been accompanying also the philanthropy work, the Quo Vadis of the foundation and philanthropy sector, analyzing the current state of play, what are the ways forward. So a great pleasure to have you here, Una. And yeah, maybe you can provide us with a short overview from your own perspective around some of the barriers that that foundations face, but also maybe some of the changes, developments, evolutions as you have observed them yourself. Thank you, Una. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannah, and I must apologise in advance. Jackhammer has started up on the street outside, so if it gets unbearable, just cut me off. I will speak briefly while he is not hammering outside the window. I think in terms of the legal barriers, they come across yet again in the comparative highlights that we've launched here today. Everybody is well aware that we have this increased cross-border activity between our philanthropic foundations. But the ability to operate as a philanthropic organisation in a member state other than your own often raises issues around your establishment. It may require recognition by the member state. In some countries, it may even require you to register before you're eligible to officially call yourself a public benefit foundation in that particular jurisdiction. Depending on your legal form, moving your seat from one region to another may also cause issues. And this is an issue I won't have to speak a lot about because I know Vino is our expert on this call and we'll come back to that issue. Differences in your legal form can also exacerbate the problem here. Of course, it's not just about your legal form. We move into the space of the fiscal measures and straight away we know that there's that tension between respecting member state tax sovereignty and at the same time respecting European principles regarding non-discrimination on the grounds of nationality, particularly as they apply to donors and philanthropic foundations. What we've seen over the duration of the comparative highlights has been this great work by the European Court of Justice in establishing the principles around free movement of philanthropic capital and again, non-discrimination on the grounds of taxation. But what we see in practice, and this very much comes across yet again in the comparative highlights that you're launching here today, is that while that principle is accepted by everybody at the upper level, conceptually, on the ground, in practice, we run into these great difficulties in member states where we don't have clarity of what comparability means. We have associated costs with that in terms of translation, unclear tests, time and energy to get back what everybody agrees should be yours in the first place. The final thing I mentioned there are the soft law issues that Ludwig referred to a moment ago. These great efforts to ensure that we don't have terrorist financing going on through our nonprofits, that we don't have money laundering going on, very important areas, but there is a vulnerability of nonprofits in this space. When regulation goes awry because of a lack of understanding in this space for nonprofits and what it means for them, we run into practical issues on the ground. Bank de-risking would be a big one in this area.
Thank you, Una. So I take indeed that barriers continue to remain. There are old barriers, there are new barriers. You also flagged the issue of bank de-risking and more reporting. We'll come to that a bit later. If you look at the previous editions and the new editions, what do you see as big lines of trends and developments? Maybe you could highlight just a couple from your own perspective.
So I think this has been a fascinating project to look back over 20 years of fiscal profiles and 3 editions of the comparative highlights. And to have that empirical data is so important to researchers, it's so important to policymakers. We've moved from 2007, the first comparative highlights, the pre-Stauffer world, if we can remember back to that time when everybody was landlocked and we didn't have the Court of Justice giving us that very clear signal that philanthropic capital can move freely. So we've moved from that to the situation we find ourselves in today, post-Stauffer, post-Heinpersch, post-mission work, great to have those principles in place. And you can see the effect of that in terms of innovation amongst our foundations. We can see that looking out for those new opportunities in terms of impact investment, in terms of supporting in different ways the development of green startups, for example. Law's still not clear there. I think that's going to be an interesting area to watch in the future as states come to grips with how do you regulate this new space? What do we really want our foundations supporting? How enabling do we want to be in this space? And I think that'll be an interesting one to watch. The other one that really comes across in this edition of the Comparative Highlights relates to the whole new raft of regulation coming out in the beneficial ownership space, and the new constraints and difficulties that's posing for foundations who don't have owners in that for-profit sense. This is private goods for public benefit. And I know that Katerina will speak to this later on. So again, I only have to highlight that upward trend, and I'm looking forward to her comments in that space.
Thank you, Unang. Thank you. This is important also to see how you see the evolution happening. And indeed, looking at the pre-European Court of Justice engagements, all the national laws were basically discriminating foreign-based organizations and their donors. And now, in theory, they shouldn't, though the problem is some of them still do. And the laws are so complicated and the administrative burdens and costs are so high that it's really frustrating to see that, 10, 15 years after those European Court of Justice decisions, it still doesn't work. It still doesn't work in practice. Now, what are maybe your thoughts on what could be done in terms of improving the operating space? And here again, we do not have a lot of time, but just your snapshot ideas about what could potentially be done to overcome some barriers that you highlighted.
Well, we know that the Commission continues to be active in this space, particularly in the infringement procedure area. And I think this is very important. The Commission needs to continue to give that constant signal that this is not acceptable to be encroaching upon that free movement for foundations and appreciation of what donors do, that we'd have non-discrimination. So I think the work of the Commission, firstly, I commend it, and I really encourage them to continue when they see these right across Europe, as we do see, that they continue to play a very active role in that space. I know also that we have put a lot of work over the past 30 years into trying to enable this space by coming up with a European structure, a European vehicle that will work across borders. So you can just be one and be recognized everywhere. And we've tried this now in so many forms. If trying was sufficient, we would be experts at this stage. We've been there with the European Association. We've been there with the European Mutual Society. We've been there with the European Foundation. The only one we got over the line was the European Cooperative Society. So there is certainly no shortage of effort. I think when we step into this space, again, as I know that there are plans to do in terms of a European association, we have to learn from the past. We have to take the lessons of why things didn't work the last time and apply it better, fail better if we're going to fail this time. And speaking as a lawyer, I will always look to the legal basis. I would say you're stuck with Article 352 as the legal basis, but let's use it better. Let's be perhaps less ambitious and more realistic when we step into this space and go with a smaller group of member states who are willing to get that European vehicle over the line and get it up and running and working through enhanced cooperation, and then let everybody else join in when they see what they're missing. Philanthropy is not a threat. It should be encouraged. If you can get 9 on board to encourage it, I would say go with it, because you have a much better chance of getting that through than getting all member states to agree when you just need one for a veto in the council.
Thank you, Unang, so much for also your notes of caution when it gets to the legal basis of developing European legal instruments. We know that there are interesting initiatives in the pipeline of creating a European association statute, and we will come back to that later in a moment. Indeed, there is always the desire to improve the situation, to overcome barriers, and we consider that there are all energies and efforts needed, of course, to do so. So let's see what can be done. And indeed, when we look at businesses and corporate structures that can indeed, move easily, merge easily, and this is not possible for the non-profit organizations, and we consider, of course, they should also have a level playing field in that regard. Attempts to do this are, of course, challenged by the legal basis, but let's see how things evolve. Now, we want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the questions around indeed the cross-border mergers, also moving the seat, some of the legal barriers that exist for foundations. And we have invited Vino van Veen, professor of law at the Free University of Amsterdam. He has been researching also the foundation sector, association sector, and issuing numerous publications in the field. He's really one of the thought persons around these questions. So it's a great privilege and honor for him to have him here today. And Vino, maybe based on your experience as also practitioner, you also work as a practitioner next to your academic work at the Free University. What are the legal barriers? How do you see the situation currently, and has this somewhat improved? And how can they potentially also apply the EU freedoms to them? And should they already be applied, or what is the current situation? Over to you, Vino.
Okay, should probably unmute. Thank you very much, Hannah. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to speak on this great law event. My compliments to you and Nicoletta and all others that have made this survey come to reality. Coming back to your question, and perhaps also to the introduction by Helmut Anheier, the lack of a harmonized legal framework definitely is prohibitive for non-profits and philanthropic organizations and all the non-profit organizations to perform cross-border mergers or migrations, which are in fact harmonized within the European Union. From a legal perspective, of union law, there's no doubt that philanthropic organizations should be able to engage in cross-border migrations, mergers and demergers as for-profit companies. The defining element here is whether the organizations qualify as a company within the meaning of Article 54 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And that is an autonomous union definition. And non-profit organizations, philanthropic organizations fall within the scope of that provision. And the only requirement is that they are economically active. You don't have to have as an aim to make a profit, although that is within the text of Article 54 of the TFEU. But the European Union has made it clear on several occasions that the only thing that is relevant is that you are in fact economically active, and it applies that criterion quite widely. If you have shareholding, 100% shareholding in another company, you're already economically active. So yes, philanthropic organizations are economic actors and therefore can engage in those transactions. The problem is that only a few countries have legislation that allow cross-border migrations or mergers. Some of them only on the basis of reciprocity, so only if the other country, the host country, prospective host country, also has that kind of regulation. So if it's not there, it's not working. Another problem is that there is no harmonized legal framework, which means that if a foundation, for example, would like to engage in a cross-border merger or migrate to another country, which needs are there. I can confirm from practice. We do get those requests. The fact that a harmonized legal framework is missing requires that the advisors on both sides of both countries have to design their own legal procedure to effectuate this transaction, which is possible, but it requires a certain level of audacity from a legal perspective and creativity. And then if you pass that line, there's also the authorities in the respective countries that have to cooperate. And sometimes what you see is that the authorities, the trade register or another official that is involved, the court, for example, you see that they are very reluctant to cooperate. Sometimes because they are reluctant to recognize that EU law supersedes domestic law, which was typical for the UK. It's not a problem anymore, but it's also the case in some other countries, or where the authorities are reluctant to sort of act outside of the stricter lines of their authority, unless they are ordered to do so by a court of law. Those are very practical problems, because it would imply that as the client, so to speak, would have to go to court to get his transaction completed, which is time consuming. It's very expensive. It's a lot of hassle, and then you may have to also be prepared to go all the way up to the European Court of Justice, as we have seen on a number of cases. So in practice, that is a real obstacle. Getting back to the presentation of Helmut Anheier, we did have relevant differences in company law as well across Europe. Not as much as with respect to foundation, but very relevant differences. This changed after the Cartesio and the Vale judgment, and also a bit the Cevic, but especially after this judgments of the court recognizing that the freedom of establishment allows companies to choose a jurisdiction where they would like to have their corporate seat. We saw massive changes, modernization of company law across Europe, because then certainly there was this realization that there was competition on the level of company law, that company law need to be attractive in order to have an interesting establishment climate for companies. I would not be surprised that if there was to be a judgment by the European Court explicitly recognizing that also philanthropic organizations can migrate to another country, can transfer their corporate seat to another country, converting into a foundation or another type of philanthropic organizations governed by that other jurisdiction, that would indeed give an immense impulse to modernization of foundation law and other relevant laws across Europe. So in a way, it's an open invitation. Do try, and Hannah, you, EFC and eChanel produced this wonderful handbook on how to use European law to get to the next step, and I hope someone picks up the glove.
Thank you, Vino. Thank you, Vino. And it's assuring to hear how the European Court of Justice and the use of EU law is indeed also acting as a correctum to make sure that the national laws more internationalize and make better use of the existing law and the existing freedoms to the sector. So indeed, there is there is hope and desire that more pioneers will move ahead, and that we could also do some more work as researchers and as practitioners from our end to make use of that. So I think it's an evolution ongoing. At the same time, of course, as you've also pointed out, there are potential avenues at stake at European level as well that could further improve. And I'm conscious that our Sergej Lagodinsky, our MEP, is only available to be with us until 11. So I would like to give him the floor now. And Vino, maybe on the question of supervision, we could maybe also come back to you a little bit later, because I know that you have also been providing some further thinking about the supervision of public benefit foundations, internal, external governance. So that would be really interesting to also get your insights into that. So if you allow me, we could maybe come back to that later. Sure. And I would now like to give the floor to Sergej Lagodinsky. He's a member of the European Parliament from the Greens, European Free Alliance, and he has been developing also some proposals, ideas around overcoming barriers, but also providing a more enabling space for the nonprofit sector. So Sergej, very happy to have you here with us. Please, could you share with us how you potentially think that the current research that is launched today here could help you in your work as policymaker? And also then, of course, share some ideas about what are the proposals that you are presenting, discussing out there, and just the essence of it. As again, we do not have time. We're very happy to continue more in-depth conversation with you on that, and already we are engaging. But for the wider audience here in the sector, it will be interesting to hear directly from you. So great to have you here. Thank you, Sergej. Over to you.
Thanks so much, and it's great to be here, great to be part of this wonderful crowd with whom we cooperate very closely. So thank you, Hannah, also for this cooperation. I consider this a joint effort, and I'm a vice chair of the Legal Affairs Committee, and this was one of the reasons why I went to the Legal Affairs Committee, because at least regarding the civil law regulations, the Legal Affairs Committee is the lead committee, is the main committee to discuss those issues. And now as a rapporteur on European associations and nonprofits in the jury committee, I have yesterday officially introduced and had submitted my draft report, which we will be negotiating in the upcoming weeks and months, and hopefully will adopt in one form or another also in the plenary end of the year. It consists of a motion for resolution that covers nonprofits generally, and sets certain principles on how we want nonprofits to be treated in the European Union, and proposes two legislative drafts. One legislative draft is still a regulation. I'm very sorry to disappoint some of you. Regulation based on 352 on European Association Statute. Why? Because we as a parliament cannot propose enhanced cooperation. It's up to the council to do that, but we can of course inject our ideas and our vision on that. And I think it is more important and more interesting now for this discussion, a directive based on 114, a directive for common minimum standards for nonprofits, which would include foundations as well. It is important to underline that for me, it is about strengthening civil society, and I consider philanthropists being an integral part of civil society, along with member-based organizations as well. What are the main points and the main and most important and interesting principles that I have enshrined in the draft of the regulation? Number one, I think getting to a more or less European definition of public benefit status would give us an orientation which would be a kind of pan-European orientation also to the Court of Justice in deciding in the future of when such status should be granted. We cannot go much into the tax matters. This is not the competence of the Legal Affairs Committee, but we can set a common definition of what public benefit status is. For example, considering the German mess that we are seeing regarding political engagement, I explicitly include political engagement as part of public benefit status, minus parties and party oriented, one-party oriented organizations. We, and it is important for me, we have stated some principles on involuntary termination and prohibition, that there should be remedies, that there should be given an opportunity to non-profits also to first try to, if it's about formalities, try to improve formalities before they are disbanded by public authorities. I have proposed the principle of equal treatment, that non-profits are treated equally on the territory of member states, regardless of where they're registered, in which member state they're registered. The so-called principle of non-arbitrary treatment, that there will be no treatment discriminating based solely on political desirability of organization's purpose, field of activities, or sources of financing. I think this is an important point, and we know the cases where this was not the case and had to be corrected on a case-by-case basis. Now we need this as a principle, general principle in the European law. And yes, I have also, and this is important to me, inserted principles of cross-border mobility and continuity, that member states shall eliminate any obstacles which affect the exercise of non-profit organizations in another state, for free movement of services, free flow of capital in its territory, and an ability to move its seat to the territory of another state without the necessity of founding or incorporation as a new legal person, and a principle of cross-border conversions and mergers in a similar way with similar issues. We do talk about fundraising and free use of assets, which should be, we want to have less obstacles there. We do want some public funding, but this is more for associations, and cross-border funding should be possible, that in accordance with European rules on free movement of capital, member states shall ensure that non-profit organizations from another member states suffer no disadvantage as a direct or indirect consequence of soliciting or receiving funding from natural or legal persons outside their territory. Also, an issue which was important now, became important this summer, ban or regulation of surveillance of non-profit organizations, that it should not be disproportionate outside of the purpose of public security. These are a couple of points. These are just a couple of points that I thought would be interesting in this crowd, from this directive that we are proposing, that would kind of set a level playing field for nonprofits generally, including the foundation, and by that open a territory, kind of open the door also for philanthropy organizations to go on with the project that we're talking about here. And this is how I also see my proposal of a regulation on establishing the statute of associations. And yes, this was a long fight, 30 years, a long fight. But I think that the European Union and history and the historical context moved on. And I think we do have many more arguments now and much more understanding of what European Union is about. It is not just about markets. This is also about democracy and civil society. It is not just about for-profit organizations. It is about, and this is how I also stated there explicitly, of course, nonprofits are market actors. And even if they reinvest the revenues that they get into their own activities and do not distribute it among members, for example, or among contributors, they are still someone generating profits or revenues, and they should be treated, and this regulation should be seen as an integral part of European regulation, cross-border European regulation. This is the goal of my proposals, and I see those proposals as opening a door and inviting also people from philanthropy area to continue with their plans and join forces on various projects of common interest. Thank you for inviting me here, and I'm looking forward to discussing also with other guests, because I saw many important points where we can profit from their knowledge, and of course from this report. I congratulate you to that, because we need a knowledge base which transcends borders, and this is what you are doing with your initiative, with your tireless work on those issues, and we as European parliamentarians profit from it tremendously. So thank you very much for your cooperation and for your work. I'm looking forward to continuing.
Thank you, Sergey, and very inspiring to hear your words and your vision also of making sure that indeed the nonprofit sector is part of the wider single market, needs to be part of that, and needs to existing barriers needs to be overcome, and certain guarantees and standards needs to be regulated. I think we will be delighted to continue the conversations also with some of the academics, experts who have been contributing and discussing here around your proposals in the very near future. So count on us to also continue to exchange on that and have some more in-depth discussions. Congratulations to your already fantastic work on this, and we'll be in contact with you again. So now you have said, Sergey, that indeed the tax questions will not be directly addressed in your proposals, also for the reasons of the competence that is there. Indeed, the tax questions are some of the areas where indeed a lot of the barriers exist, because that is so cumbersome for donors when they want to give a cross-border. And the laws do still not enable cross-border philanthropy in a tax-effective way. So we have invited now Giedre Liedeke-Huber from the University of Geneva to give us an overview over the tax issues that foundations philanthropy face in Europe. And she has worked on a very in-depth OECD taxation and philanthropy research piece that was also debated in several events and presented in different occasions. And you were also a member of the advisory committee to this project and provided good insights also into the analysis around the tax part. So we would like to invite you and give you the floor to, again, in a very short snapshot, share some of your thoughts, compare also the findings that you have. Are they in line with this research, and what are the key trends that you have observed? Giedre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Do you hear me well? Is it okay? The sound is right. So thank you very much at first for inviting me to participate in this project. It's a very important work and it's very interesting. I was delighted to provide my knowledge on the specific tax issue related to philanthropy. In this short presentation, I will just concentrate on the cross-border context because it would not be possible to review all the trends in Europe. And in a cross-border context, there are basically three principal trends or three principal characteristics that I would like to highlight that regard the legal framework applicable to philanthropic foundations. Firstly, what we see from the study is that if a foundation carries out its activities abroad, this does not generally put at risk its tax-exempt status or its ability to receive tax-deductible donations. So once foundation is based in a country where it can receive tax-exempt status, it can really do some activities abroad, which is really positive for cross-border philanthropy. I mean, you can have some requirements concerning the minimum level of domestic activities, but in general, the regimes are quite permissive. So that's the first good trend in my view. Secondly, it was mentioned already several times by Professor Breen and by Han and by other speakers. It's a good and bad news, but almost all countries are at least in formal compliance with the ECJ case law. So as we know, the member states of the EU are required by the EU case law to provide a degree of reciprocity in the tax treatment of cross-border giving and of philanthropic entities that operate across borders. This is subject to a so-called comparability assessment. Basically, once a member state decides to provide for an advantageous tax treatment for its charities and charitable giving, it should really also provide a non-discriminatory tax treatment in comparable intra-EU scenarios. So the good news is that we see that the majority of countries are indicating at least that they grant equivalent tax concessions to donors giving both domestically and within the EU, as well as to charitable entities. But it is, however, surprising that certain countries still indicate, and you will see it in the charts of which are at the end of the report. So certain countries still indicate in the survey that they do not apply equal tax treatment to giving within the EU or to activities of comparable EU-based philanthropic entities operating in their respective jurisdictions. So we know that such positions are not in line with the EU case law, and that would be definitely a point for action to see what's happening there. Is it like a formal legal norm that does not allow comparable tax treatment, or it's more related to the practice that was already mentioned before? So definitely a point for action there. And the third trend, which I wanted to mention, is what we see that beyond the EU framework, beyond the European Union, there is little tax support provided by countries for cross-border giving. So even though in the EU it's not perfect, but we still have tax support and we have possibilities to give. But outside the EU, there is almost nothing. So this is also something which perhaps should be addressed in the near future, how we create a framework that would be more permissive for cross-border donation in a global philanthropic context. That would be my very brief overview of cross-border philanthropy and the main trends. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gidra. Indeed, so basically your findings and observations are the same. It still doesn't work in practice. Not all the laws have removed the discrimination. They should have, but not all have. And from a practical perspective, we know indeed that it costs, is cumbersome, and it just does not work as a single market as it should be. The free flow of capital and non-discrimination principle is not fully implemented in a meaningful way. Now, I would like to also invite now Katharina Burlafringer, assistant to Nicolas Baer, who has over the past year considered this point of philanthropy not having a fully fledged single market access. So Katharina Burlafringer, your assistant to Nicolas Baer, please maybe you can share in brief what was the rationale for Nicolas Baer to indeed pick up the topic of cross-border philanthropy.
Yes, thank you for having me. So first, I'm overwhelmed by all this passion I could hear and see. My notebook is almost full of all the notes I took. So it's very interesting, and it will definitely help us with our work in the European Parliament. So to come go forward with the rationale of Mrs. Baer, I think first it is important to mention that she herself is very active in philanthropic organizations, in associations. She worked a long time as a volunteer So she has a personal intrinsic motivation to work on this topic. And she also knows about the barriers herself from her own work besides the European Parliament. So this is why she already started with this term when she came to the European Parliament for the first time with this project. And she combined it very smart with her interest she has in the Econ Committee. So yeah, as Mr. Lagodinsky said, I mean, European Union is not only about markets, but it is also about markets. For example, a single market for philanthropy. And this is something that really belongs into the Econ Committee. So this is why we wanted to push for it in the Econ Committee, or why Mrs. Beer wanted to push for it. And then on a very unfortunate occasion, the COVID-19 crisis, it was very obvious why we need to push for it, because during COVID, it was clear that civil society, philanthropy, philanthropic organizations in general can work where very often the state or a government cannot. And so if we ask ourselves where philanthropy is, then we can say it's in research and innovation, in environmental protection, in social care, in all these sectors and fields. And this is the reason why Nicola Beer works on this important topic. So I hope, yeah, this was clear.
Yeah, that was very clear. No, fantastic. And it's great also to feel your enthusiasm and her enthusiasm around this topic. So you will continue to working to overcoming also some of the tax barriers and barriers that were outlined by the previous speakers, I take. Just very brief, because we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what we could see from, I mean, actually, I could wrap up all what Una said, but also what Ludwig briefly presented with the new report, but also with the PA's research over the last years. I mean, already. So for us, I mean, sure, cross-border giving must be possible and must be enabled. And we can clearly see, I mean, we not only have legal barriers, we have administrative barriers, and we have in particular these fiscal barriers that we want to tackle. So for us, it's, for example, it's very important that we can achieve like safe banking channels, for example, that we can have tax deductions and reductions. So this is what we want to work on, because we also want, of course, to incentivize people to be and to stay active in the public good. And also when we look at, for example, foreign funding restrictions, we definitely want to tackle this issue. And this is why we first started with an INI in the Econ Committee. This now turned into a motion for resolution. We will soon launch in the European Parliament.
Thank you, and bon courage for that. It's a very important topic to also address the tax law barriers. Whether or not that will be a legislative tool or rather soft law approaches remains to be seen. Thank you, Katharina, for being here with us. So I would like to now move on to Mia Rossi from the European Commission. We now heard different views from the European Parliament and initiatives that are in the pipeline, in the making, which sound encouraging to overcome certain barriers. So Mia Rossi Gray, she works for DG Employ and is involved in the Social Economy Action Plan. So Mia, very happy to have you here in our conversation, and it would be great if you could share a little bit of how you see that foundations, philanthropic organizations their ways of working fit into the social economy action plan, and how much also maybe a little bit about simply the way forward for the social economy action plan. As you know, we as the philanthropic infrastructure, we have been making proposals into the action plan. We have been engaging around that, but we would like to hear from you where it stands, what's the current state of play. So Mia, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah. So allow me to start first by saying that I'm very happy to be here today, speaking to you all. The publication of these comparative highlights comes at a very well-timed moment when the Commission is actively working to boost the social economy across Europe. Of course, we recognize the important role of foundations in that they are considered part of the social economy in themselves, but many foundations also act as funders and investors into social enterprises and other social economy entities. So foundations are indeed a very important player to us. And to explain also, to give the background why social economy is so important to us right now, it's in the context of the green and digital transitions of our economies and the recovery from the COVID crisis. The EU is now seeking to reinvent an economic model based on fair, sustainable and inclusive growth. And here the capacity of the social economy to trigger this transformation is gaining momentum. And the political momentum for the social economy is very high at the moment. Since the entry into office of Commission President von der Leyen, some 20 Commission initiatives already make reference to this potential. And social economy is an important actor, for instance, in the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And what brings all of these social economy actors together is their commitment to put people first. And this is true. This holds whether they're social enterprises, cooperatives, mutuals, foundations, or associations. And this is why the Commission now plans to put forward an action plan for social economy still this year. The action plan will feature EU-level solutions to the identified problems and barriers facing the social economy or holding back its full potential. The Commission wishes to improve the enabling conditions for social economy across Europe, including foundations, including improved visibility and recognition and access to finance and markets. And working on this initiative, we will build on the experience gained under previous initiatives, such as the 2011 Social Business Initiative and its follow-up under the 2016 Startup and Scale-up Initiative. The Social Business Initiative, as I'm sure you very well all know, included the proposal for the European Foundation Statute, which was finally withdrawn in 2014 by the Juncker Commission due to the lack of support in the Council of the EU. We have been gathering evidence on the impact of these previous initiatives through various studies and through an open consultation on the roadmap for the action plan. We have also received position papers from plenty of social economy stakeholders, including the EFC and Daphne. We have listened to the foundation sector through other means as well. Philanthropic institutions have had the opportunity to contribute to the evidence gathering through the European Commission's expert group on social economy. And we have also engaged with philanthropic actors and other social economy entities at events and meetings, such as today's event. And we, of course, hear from the foundation sector that philanthropic organizations may still face various legal and tax limitations in taking full advantage of the single market. And we are aware of the challenge, and we're looking into the issue also in the context of the action plan. So currently we're digesting all the input that we have received into the action plan and all this information gathered. We're working in cooperation with various Commission services. Social economy is incredibly wide-ranging, and it has an impact on plenty of different policy fields. So nearly all the directorates general of the Commission are involved. And the action plan is foreseen to be published in December.
Thank you very much for these inspiring perspectives, and also that the Social Economy Action Plan will indeed be published this year still. So we will be eager following. And as you said, we have engaged quite a bit around that, and we believe indeed also that social economy as a whole has a very important role to play, and foundations, philanthropic actors in that as well, both as actors in their own right as well as funders of social economy actors and investing into social economy structures. So there we see also that a lot could be done to further improve some of these tools. The laws, as we have identified and analyzed and mapped them, are not all picking up. So potentially there is need to also enlarge the toolbox there at the member state level. And there is potential indeed to try to find solutions for overcoming barriers. But bon courage for the final steps in the action plan, obviously. And indeed, it seems it's very good signals that we see that there is a strong willingness from the European Commission and to really promote a social economy and to provide new opportunities for collaborating with this sector and for engaging more with this sector to solve certain societal issues and important policy areas that needs addressing. Thank you, Mia. And we'll be happy to stay in touch, obviously, to discuss and see how everything evolves. Now, I would like to move on to one of the areas where we have indeed seen that the security agenda, money laundering, terrorism financing, important policies developed there, but also policy that has potentially had a bit of a chilling impact on our sector. That is what our mapping revealed. And I'm very glad to have now Katarzyna Żurawska, professor at the Masaryk University of Brno in Czech Republic, with us here, and she will share her analysis in very brief about the findings from the comparative research around the questions of money laundering, terrorism financing, and particular also beneficial ownership policy on the sector. So Katarzyna, the floor is yours. We know that you've been suffering from quite a bit of a cold, so a big thank you, a special thank you to you for making the effort to nonetheless join us for this important conversation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry, my voice is really not perfect, so I keep it short. And what I would like to talk about is the impact of the anti-money laundering directives and the policies of European Union on foundation sector, and what we have found out from our survey. And it's quite interesting because it has a broader meaning, because especially the searching for the ultimate beneficiary owners, all business and non-business structures is a topic of the last years, I would say, and not only on national level, because the European Union, the anti-money laundering directives impose some duties to member states to create and administrate the ultimate beneficiary registries in each country. But because now it had to happen at the European Commission realized that it doesn't really work the way it was expected that it will, because when such a national registries were created, there were not exact rules how to do that. So there are many different registries with many different data inside, and those data are not really compatible. So that's something what EU doesn't want to. EU wants to have a data which are having some information value. They're complete, precise, up to date, and suddenly it doesn't work very well. So there are some moves also on the level of EU to do something with that. And I believe Mr. Salazar will talk about it. To make clear what is the ultimate beneficiary owner, is any nature person who is having ultimate benefit, ultimate benefit from some structure, from some legal person or trust structure, or somebody who is controlling it directly or indirectly. And of course, this is something different by the business corporation on one side and foundations and trust on the other side. And such a distinction makes also the European directives, and this is also mirroring in the regulations in member states. And because the wording of the directive is not very clear, it shows also our survey that there is a problem of understanding and of interpretation of rules which are set up in the each member state. And I would say that this could be very good. It shows very well that there is very difficult to find a common denominator in the definition of the ultimate beneficiary owner of foundations in each country, and that data are really not really compatible, I would say, and that lowers the information value of such a data from the registries. And there was also idea that such a registries of ultimate beneficiary owners has to be connected, and it's not really possible right now because each registry is collecting a bit different data. So I think this is something what the European Union will work on. And what came out from the survey also, and what makes us worried, I would say, that in some countries were reported new duties and new administrative burdens for the philanthropy and for different kind of action of the NGOs, and it has some kind of potential to that some maybe in some states is the tendency to keep the sector under the control of the state, which is not very good news from my point of view. So I think this is what we have to pay attention to either.
Thank you, Katarzyna. Thank you very much for flagging some of the points related to the also implementation of the current EU money laundering terrorism financing policy, which indeed was not clear to member states in all the times how they should do it. It's not clear how it should be applied to the non-profit sector and to the foundation sector. So that's where we made a call also for the new policy to clarify potentially some questions related to that and to avoid overregulation, obviously. Now I have the pleasure to invite Juan Antonio Salazar from DG FISMA to speak. I think there was an issue with the camera, still is, Juan Antonio, right?
Yes.
So maybe you could then speak without the camera, unfortunately, but explain a little bit what is the rationale about the new EU AML package that is out there. What are the objectives, and how you see it relates to the philanthropic foundation sector. Thank you, Juan Antonio.
Thank you very much, Hannah, firstly for the invitation, but very especially for this report that you have published today, which is absolutely of an extremely usefulness for our daily work regarding anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. In this regard, I'm going to be extremely brief and also giving a kind of follow-up to the words of Professor Ronowska right before. You know that the Commission has presented a legislative proposal on July this year regarding the updating of the legal framework at union level addressed to controlling money laundering, countering money laundering and terrorism financing. In this area, I always feel a bit weird when I participate in these meetings with you, with philanthropy organizations, because you know that this legislation is not directly addressed to covering specifically philanthropic organizations, but of course, everyone knows that it has, as one of the major consequences, effects on the activity, on the action of these organizations. So I would like to just underline a couple of maybe the most important efforts that we are trying to convey in this new package. First, clarification of issues. We are mostly working to clarify which beneficial ownership means and which are the rules that have to be applied to this area. So I'm mostly these days working on implementation of these rules, beneficial ownership. The proper implementation of beneficial ownership related rules are for us a priority within the priority. And also, I would like to underline that, secondly, the desire to clarify also which are the customer due diligence related rules are also of extreme importance for us regarding the new package. On a second stage, I would also like to mention that due to the preparation and presentation of this legislative proposal, also the work related with the supranational risk assessment that in principle should have been published in July this year is going to be delayed until first quarter, at least, of the next year. So there's still room for, of course, development, contacts, and improvement regarding this area. Just to finalize my intervention, I would like to also highlight the very extremely important moment, a real window of opportunity that is open to us all during the at least 18 months, because of once our proposal has been tabled, there's this open discussion that is going to appear, and is going to take place between the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Council, and also the civil society, of course, regarding how the proposal is going to finally be adopted. So there's still room for introducing new ideas, new proposals, and fine-tuning this area. I would like finally to also building up on some of the previous contributions that from a practical perspective, our work is very much rooted in the freedom of movement of capital, but also the principle of non-discrimination. So we are working very strongly committed in this area, and very strongly committed in engaging with you, as it has been the previous experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Antonio, for giving us the update also on how the EU AML package and the supranational risk assessment then also will be moving on. And certainly we have already engaged around the package, and we will continue to do so. We understand there is now a little bit more time even to do this. So we will seek to also engage around the application of the beneficial ownership concept to our sector and how to avoid unintended consequences. So we'll be happy to be in contact with you in the near future. So now I'm conscious that we are getting to the end of our seminar. There were some questions in the chat that we couldn't really address. One of them was around what is the best operating environment from the perspective of the the experts. And I guess that's a challenging question to answer, because as I see it, a lot of the countries have their pros and cons on different elements. But we'll be happy to continue exchanging on this topic. And I would like now to hand over to Delphine Morales, the Chief Executive of the European Foundation Center, for some concluding remarks on her end before we end the session. Thank you. Delphine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you everyone for being here. What a fantastic way to launch this key publication and to celebrate the European Day of Foundations and Donors with all of you. Concluding after such a rich discussion is really a challenge, but to me, celebrating the European Day of Foundations and Donors actually seems even more important today than it might have been over the past decades. We know that the world is facing a series of unprecedented crises, and the pandemic has made it painfully clear that the big issues that our generations are grappling with can just not be dealt with by one sector alone. And as Katerina mentioned, foundations and funders of all sizes across Europe have really stepped up to meet the demands of the pandemic and to foster solidarity in the recovery phase. In fact, already by May 2020, our analysis identified combined commitments from European philanthropy of almost 1.1 billion euro. Philanthropic actors and foundations promote ideas, using their ability to encourage and support new thinking and approaches for positive change that complement public action. They pilot innovation and share successful initiatives that governments can take up and scale, and they encourage civic engagement and empower the voice of European citizens. But European foundations, European philanthropic actors need to be able to play their part, and to be able to play their part, to be the strategic partner they want to be, as mentioned by Carola, they need an enabling environment. And our research published today once again demonstrates that an enabling environment is not something that we can just take for granted. As philanthropy infrastructure, and together with national, European and international experts, we monitor, analyze and encourage around developments that impact our operating space. Our engagement with policymakers needs at all times to be evidence-based, and our comparative highlights and national reports are, in our view, an important piece in this regard. What was made clear from the speakers today is that while business can operate easily across border, philanthropic organizations are still today lacking a playing field. Supranational legal forms to facilitate philanthropic engagement, as well as other ways, could be considered to overcome existing barriers. Tax-effective giving and investment by philanthropic actors are still complex. And as mentioned by Ona, the application of the freedom of capital coupled with the non-discrimination principle to facilitate cross-border philanthropy must be better implemented at national level. And while security measures, including on money laundering and terrorism financing, are crucial to protect our societies, their implementation must be risk-based, proportionate and evidence-based, with still quite a few obstacles there to be addressed, as raised by Katarzyna. In his introduction, Ludwig referred to the fact that governments are still trying to encourage philanthropy, and Deirdre also highlighted the progress in making cross-border giving possible within the EU. But it is also clear that European funders and their infrastructure have to be vigilant to maintain and shape their space in order to be able to step into tomorrow, as was referred to by Carola in her introduction. As mentioned by Wino, we still lack a harmonized legal framework, and as stressed by Helmut, we need further reforms to modernize foundations regulations. I very much liked Ona's words when saying that philanthropy is not a threat, and we need to be pragmatic in finding a way forward. We will continue to work on this agenda with experts, with researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and we look forward to the collaboration with all of you ahead. So on this note, a big thank you to all of you for being here today. Thank you to MEPs Sergei Lagodinsky and Nicolas Baer for believing in philanthropy. And thank you also to the European Commission represented by Mia and Juan for recognizing the value of our sector. Thank you to all the speakers, contributors, experts, and a big thank you from me also to the EFC and Daphne team, as well as to Mercator Stiftung for making this publication and this event happen. I wish you a very nice day and look forward to continuing our conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So enriching.
Bye.